After 15 years of keeping the unions happy, I was told I was too empathetic and pushed out. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and betrayal. "Mark, we're restructuring." Janet's voice cut through the air like a scalpel. "Your position is being eliminated." I stared at her. 15 years. 15 goddamn years of keeping the peace between Vegas Tech and Local 447. My coffee mug, the one that read, "World's Most Patient Negotiator," sat half empty on the polished table. Eliminated? The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Your approach has become too empathetic." She slid a manila folder across the mahogany. "We need someone who can take a harder line with the unions." The room tilted. Too empathetic. I'd prevented 17 strikes, negotiated wage increases that kept productivity soaring, and built relationships that made other companies weep with envy. Too empathetic. Meet Derek Morrison. She gestured to the shark-eyed man beside her, our new director of labor relations. Derek leaned forward, all teeth and cologne. "We'll be renegotiating hard. These union thugs have had it too easy." My hands trembled, not from fear, from rage. "Security will escort you out." Janet's words sounded underwater. "Clean out your office. Your access is already terminated." I stood, legs unsteady. The folder contained my severance. 3 months, 15 years reduced to 90 days of pay. "Any questions?" Derek smirked. "Just one. How long before you realize what you've done?" The drive home passed in a blur of suburban streets I'd traveled for 15 years. Same route, same time, until today. Sarah was watering her roses when I pulled into the driveway at 11:47 a.m. instead of 6:30 p.m. Her face told the story before I said a word. They let me go. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table where I'd reviewed countless contracts, prepared for hundreds of meetings, crafted solutions that kept 20,000 workers employed and Vegas Tech profitable. The coffee ring stains mapped out years of pre-dawn strategy sessions, 15 years. I started when Tommy Benedetto ran Local 447 with brass knuckles and broken English. The old-timers called me college boy and tested every boundary. I learned their names, their kids' names, their fears about automation and outsourcing. When Benedetto's arthritis got bad, I drove him to doctor appointments. When his grandson needed surgery, I expedited the insurance approval personally. Sarah brought me coffee in my favorite mug. "What will you do?" I thought about the Christmas parties where union families hugged me like their own, the handshake agreements that held when lawyers failed, the trust I'd built brick by brick, conversation by conversation. "They think empathy is weakness," I said. "But empathy isn't just understanding people. It's knowing exactly how to hurt them." TOO, phone buzzed. Text messages from shop stewards, foremen, union reps. Word traveled fast in their network. 23 messages, all variations of the same theme. What the hell happened? I set the phone aside. Derek would learn soon enough what those relationships were worth. He'd discover that contracts are just paper without the human connections that make them work. The irony wasn't lost on me. They fired their bridge to the workers on the eve of contract negotiations. Every major agreement expired in 6 weeks. I pulled out my laptop and began typing. Not a resume. A list. The first week, I watched from the shadows. Derek scheduled a hardline strategy session with Vegas Tech's executive team. I learned this from Maria Santos, my former assistant, who'd been reassigned but still forwarded me the calendar invites, by mistake. Small acts of rebellion. The loyalty network ran deeper than they knew. I spent my mornings at Denny's on Industrial Boulevard, the spot where third-shift workers grabbed breakfast. They vented freely, assuming I was just another unemployed middle manager. Derek had already started making waves. He'd cut the annual safety bonus in half and eliminated the flexible vacation bank I'd negotiated in 2019. Small cuts, death by 1,000 paper cuts. That new asshole doesn't understand, grumbled Pete Kowalski, a 20-year assembly veteran. Mark knew how to listen. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. The union leaders were more guarded, but I still had their numbers. Tommy Benedetto, now retired but still influential, invited me to lunch at Giuseppe's, the restaurant where we'd hammered out the 2018 benefits package over veal parmesan. "They made a mistake," Tommy said, cutting his meat with surgical precision. "Probably." I kept my voice neutral. Derek Morrison. I looked him up. Union buster from Phoenix, broke 3 locals in Arizona. Tommy's eyes hardened. "They brought in a killer." I nodded, but inside, wheels were turning. Derek's reputation preceded him. Aggressive tactics, intimidation, the exact opposite of everything that had kept Vegas Tech's labor relations stable. "What are you thinking, Mark?" I met his gaze. "I'm thinking Derek doesn't know these people like we do." That afternoon I drove past the plant. 3 shifts, 4,000 workers across 6 buildings. Each facility had its own culture, its own informal leaders, its own pressure points. Derek saw numbers on a spreadsheet. I saw a complex ecosystem of human relationships. My phone buzzed. LinkedIn notification. Derek had posted about bringing discipline to labor negotiations. The comments were already filling with responses from Vegas Tech workers, not positive ones. I closed the laptop and smiled for the first time in days. The plan required patience and precision. I couldn't be the obvious hand behind what came next. First, I reached out to Elena Rodriguez, the shop steward at Building C. We'd worked together on the 2020 safety protocols after the machinery accident. She trusted me, but more importantly, she was respected by workers and feared by management. Derek's planning to eliminate overtime pay for weekends, I mentioned casually during our coffee meeting. It wasn't true yet, but Derek's pattern in Phoenix suggested it was inevitable. "Thought you should know." Elena's face darkened. Within hours, rumors spread through the factory floor like wildfire. Workers began organizing, defensive measures, building solidarity before the axe fell. Next, I called Marcus Webb, the union's communications director. Young, ambitious, and still angry about Derek's dismissive attitude during their first meeting. "Remember the safety audit from 2019, I asked. "The one that found all those OSHA violations?" "Sure. We fixed those. Derek's talking about rolling back some of those safety measures to cut costs." Another seed. Another truth that hadn't happened yet but would. "Might want to document everything, you meant?" Marcus began quietly photographing safety equipment, measuring compliance, building a file. Insurance against future cuts. The beauty of social engineering isn't forcing people to act against their nature. It's giving them permission to act according to it. I spent the next 2 weeks cultivating conversations. A word to Jimmy Castellano about potential layoffs in his department. A hint to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the plant physician, about cuts to the medical facility. Each conversation strategically chosen, each person a node in the network. Derek, meanwhile, was making my job easier. He'd instituted mandatory overtime without consultation, eliminated the breakroom coffee service. Small things that violated the unwritten social contract that kept the peace. The tipping point came when Derek announced his plan to streamline the grievance process. Instead of the collaborative approach I developed, he wanted to handle all complaints personally, through his office with his approval. I didn't need to sabotage that idea. The workers did it themselves. Within 3 days, Derek's office was flooded with formal grievances. Every minor complaint that would have been resolved with a conversation now required paperwork, meetings, and formal procedures. His assistant quit. Maria Santos accidentally scheduled conflicting meetings that left Derek running between buildings like a caffeinated hamster. But the real masterstroke was the memo. Derek had written an internal communication about union manipulation, tactics and strategies to neutralize organized resistance. Standard union-busting playbook stuff. The memo was meant for senior management only. It accidentally got sent to the entire company mailing list. Maria swore it was a technical glitch. She'd been entering the distribution list when her computer froze. The mistake seemed innocent enough. Just a nervous assistant making an error under pressure. 4,000 workers read Derek's strategies for undermining their representatives. His plans to eliminate benefits. His contempt for their emotional manipulation and manufactured grievances. The memo hit the plant floor at shift change. Peak visibility, peak impact. By evening, my phone was buzzing with calls from union leaders. Not asking for help, asking for permission to go to war. The strike started on a Tuesday. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious, too coordinated. Instead, they rippled through the plants like a virus. Building A went first, citing safety concerns over Derek's proposed equipment modifications. Building C followed 2 days later over the overtime changes. Building E struck over the eliminated grievance process. Derek had never seen anything like it. Separate strikes with separate demands, but unified in their rejection of his leadership. He couldn't negotiate with one group. Vegas Tech's executives panicked. They brought in lawyers, consultants, crisis management specialists. But the unions weren't breaking any laws. They were following their contracts to the letter, using every procedural tool I'd helped negotiate. Over 15 years. The press discovered Derek's leaked memo. Vegas Tech executive calls workers easily manipulated, read the headline in the Industrial Tribune. Local news picked it up. Social media exploded. Derek's attempts at damage control made everything worse. His press conference was a disaster of corporate doublespeak and barely concealed contempt. A video of him dismissing a reporter's question about worker safety went viral with the hashtag #TOO EMPATHETIC. The strikes spread. Solidarity walkouts from other locals. Teamsters refused to cross picket lines. Suppliers faced their own union pressure. Vegas Tech's entire supply chain seized up like a rusted engine. But the killing blow came from within. Maria Santos, my former assistant, had access to Derek's calendar, emails, and phone logs. She began documenting every meeting, every call, every attempt to circumvent union contracts. Not for sabotage, for quality assurance. When Derek tried to negotiate secret deals with individual workers, offering bribes to break the strikes, Maria's records provided perfect evidence. The National Labor Relations Board launched an investigation within hours of receiving her complaint. Derek found himself isolated. His allies in management began distancing themselves as the legal exposure grew. The board of directors called emergency meetings. Stock price dropped 12% in 3 days. Vegas Tech was hemorrhaging money, credibility, and control. And Derek Morrison, the man who promised to take a hard line with the unions, was begging for help from the same workers he'd tried to crush. I got the call on a Friday evening. Janet's voice was different now, smaller. "Mark, we need to talk." The same conference room, the same burnt coffee smell. But the power dynamic had shifted completely. Janet sat across from me like a defendant waiting for sentencing. "Derek's been terminated," she said without preamble. "The board wants you back." I said nothing. Let the silence work. Full reinstatement, salary increase, expanded authority, whatever you need. She slid a contract across the table. "We need you to fix this." The irony was delicious. Too empathetic. They'd called my approach too empathetic. I opened the contract. Better than generous. Desperate was more accurate. "The unions want Derek's changes reversed immediately," I said. "Full rollback to the previous agreements." Done. "And I want Maria Santos as my permanent assistant. With a promotion." "Of course." "One more thing." I looked up. "I want a formal apology from the company to the workers. Public acknowledgement that the strikes were justified responses to management overreach." Janet winced, but nodded. I signed the contract with the same pen I'd used 15 years ago. Some tools never lose their purpose. The strikes ended within a week of my return. Not because I demanded it, but because the workers trusted me to keep management honest. The same relationships Derek had tried to break became the foundation for rebuilding. Tommy Benedetto called it the fastest resolution in Local 447's history. Elena Rodriguez said it proved that empathy wasn't weakness. It was power that most people were too stupid to recognize. 6 months later, Vegas Tech reported record productivity and the lowest labor relations budget in the industry. The board sent me a bonus and a plaque that read "Excellence in Employee Relations." I kept Derek's termination letter in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. In the business of human relationships, empathy isn't just understanding people, it's knowing exactly how to help them destroy themselves.